What a great audience. This audience produced the 5th executive president of Sri Lanka. And I believe that this audience will also produce the 7th executive president of Sri Lanka. Ladies and gentlemen, Sri Lanka was more prosperous than Japan and Hong Kong in the 1950s. Sri Lanka was more prosperous than South Korea, Malaysia, and Singapore in the 1960s. Sri Lanka was more prosperous than Taiwan in the 1970s. But what happened? The very foundation of social stability and of economic growth and prosperity is dependent on security. Unless we build a stable nation, a nation where there is stability, where there is harmony, then we cannot move from the third world to the first world. Many countries that were not so prosperous as Sri Lanka has surpassed Sri Lanka because the stability and security of this nation could not be maintained, because geopolitically we made some blunders. And I thought I should speak very frankly and very openly of those mistakes. I served as a research assistant to the President of Sri Lanka, President Viyathmaga. And at that time, I had very unique insights into what went wrong. The rule before President Viyathmaga by Mrs. Bandaranayake, she shifted towards alliances and friendship and associations with the East. Marshal Tito, links with the Soviet Union, very close to Mrs. Gandhi. And President Viyathmaga moved very close to the United States. I recall on a visit to India, I met the founder head of India's Foreign Intelligence Service, the Research and Analysis Wing, R.N. Kao. Mr. Kao told me, very frankly, he said that India was within the Soviet sphere of influence and Sri Lanka had stepped out of the non-aligned orbit and was within the American sphere of influence. He mentioned Trincomalee, the Trincomalee oil tank farms. The Indians feared that there was American buildup in Sri Lanka. There was the Voice of America station. The Indians feared that VOA was spying into what was happening in India. In fact, in one of the last meetings I had with President Viyathmaga, he said that Mrs. Gandhi at one point told him that there was a Jewish community, that there was an Israeli interest section in Sri Lanka, and to get rid of it, President Viyathmaga said, "Madam, but you have a similar Israeli presence in Bombay or Mumbai now." And she said, "That's because I have a Jewish community, a large community, and I can't do that." So I want to say that in many ways, the Indo-Sri Lanka relations created huge tension. And all of us know that after the riots of July 1983, India armed, trained, financed more than 20,000 terrorists. They were all based in Tamil Nadu. The first batch of Tamil Tigers were trained in Uttar Pradesh, in Establishment 22, north of Chakrata in Dehradun. And the second batch was trained in Himachal Pradesh. And 8 other batches, including the woman that killed Rajiv Gandhi, Danu, her real name is Tenmuli Rajaratnam. She was trained in the 7th batch of the training that was conducted in India. So for 30 years, Sri Lanka suffered as a result of conflict. And it was a huge challenge and a huge miracle that Sri Lanka could achieve peace, because it fought not just a terrorist group, but a highly capable force, very much like going to war with another country. And we must not forget that. So we got our geopolitics wrong. What is the solution for this? In the next 10 years, this region is going to be a region of great competition, of rivalry, and of challenge. Already, we have seen the developments in the Maldives, in the Seychelles, Indian links in Maldives, the Chinese build-up. All this is going to create great tension in the next 10 years. So as Sri Lanka moves into the future, what kind of strategy are we going to adopt? I would put before this audience of pundits, of men and women of intellect to debate an idea. Why not Sri Lanka be a neutral state where all powers can work with Sri Lanka? Why not we build Sri Lanka's profile on the basis that constitutionally we say that we are a neutral state? We do not build a special alliance either with the Americans, with the Indians, or with the Chinese. And we advocate issues of freedom of navigation in the Indian Ocean. We advocate issues where we will resolve disputes and challenges, because the Indian Ocean, ladies and gentlemen, is going to be a region where there's going to be great focus. As the center of gravity of the world shifts from the Asia-Pacific to the Indo-Pacific region, already we have seen great signs and landmark developments where the world powers are shifting towards Asia. Let us look at the West. The West dominated the world only for 500 years. The Spanish, the French, the Portuguese, the Dutch, the British. But before that, we witnessed great civilizations: the Iranians, the Persians, the Arabs, the Greeks, the Romans, the Egyptians, the Chinese. So if you look at global civilization, it's only for 500 years the West has dominated the world. And today we are seeing a revival of those old powers. Iran challenging the West. China rising and challenging the West. So we are witnessing a very momentous era. And Sri Lanka is going to be, at that geopolitical moment, a very important entity. Let me also go deep into the history of our nation and tell you that 21 countries have invaded this beautiful land in the last 2,500 years. We had 17 invasions from India, one from the Dutch, another from the Portuguese, another from the British. But there was also invasion of the Chinese. The Chinese took our king away in the 14th century. Admiral General Cheng He, he came in his armada of battleships, and he took Veera Alakesar, the king of Kotte, to China. He wanted to behead the king. And General Cheng He brought a plaque that was placed in gold. And that plaque said, "The king did not honor the law of the Buddha." And as such, the king was taken captive by him. And Cheng He wanted to behead him. But fortunately, the king became blind during the voyage to China. So Cheng He spared the king. And from that king, today we have an extended family of Sri Lankans and Chinese. So I want to share with you that for Sri Lanka to survive, for Sri Lanka to prosper, for Sri Lanka to raise its profile, it should think whether we can be the Geneva of Asia. Switzerland, during World War II, advocated this policy. Switzerland hosted the League of Nations that became the United Nations. Switzerland became the key hub for hosting many of those international organizations. Why not Sri Lanka? At this point, the United Nations is decentralizing. Very soon, New York will be only a conference hub for logistics, for procurement, for accountancy, for IT. The UN is going to move. Already, a key decision has been made to move the Department of Peacekeeping Operations of the United Nations to Kampala in Uganda, because 80% of the peacekeeping operations are in Africa. It makes no sense for the UN to be all centered in New York. So I believe that this is a great moment for Sri Lanka to offer land, for UN to base one of its entities in Sri Lanka. Let me move beyond the theory of an equidistance foreign policy, moving even beyond into a neutral Sri Lanka, constitutionally enshrined. How can it be done? Certainly there must be bipartisanship between government and opposition. Certainly there must be agreement between leaders that this is in the long-term national strategic interests of Sri Lanka, as opposed to personal and political interests. This is one of the scenarios that I would like to share with you. Second is, as Sri Lanka moves forward, it needs to relook at its national security. In the lead up to 2009, where Sri Lanka defeated one of the ruthless hybrid groups, an insurgent army and a terrorist organization. It developed through innovation many capabilities in law enforcement, military, and intelligence. Restored stability. Even Gokulan, who came and performed, I want to share with you a rehabilitated cadre. His father, Shantan, sang 600 songs that brought people to join the LTT. Another 600 songs after rehabilitation, devotional songs. Another 200 love songs. Similarly, Gokulan sang both love songs and devotional songs, but they were rehabilitated. Rehabilitation is one of the greatest achievements of the then Sri Lankan government to restore stability and security, long-term stability in this country. The world learned from the Sri Lankan example. I can share with you that the word beneficiary, we never called a terrorist in rehabilitation a terrorist or a criminal or a detainee or a prisoner. We called him beneficiary. And today, even in Pakistan, in Swat, in the 2 rehabilitation centers, they learned so much from the Sri Lankan experience. They call their terrorists undergoing rehabilitation beneficiaries. They benefit something. So I want to say that Sri Lanka was at the cutting edge of innovation. That's why the war could be won. And I want to say that another innovation that we should think of is to create a fourth force. We have a Sri Lanka Army, Sri Lanka Navy, and a Sri Lanka Air Force. But today, the real challenge is not only coming from the physical space, but from the cyberspace. We need another capability. We need to create as the fourth force, a Sri Lanka cyber force. A force not for offense, but for defense. To protect our IT infrastructure, to protect our cyber domain, to protect our gateway. Of course, in the event of conflict, transformation of defensive weapons into offensive weapons is not difficult. Let me move on beyond to a third phase. I mentioned that one of the greatest accomplishments of the government of Sri Lanka, as the war ended, was the reintegration of 12,000 fighters. None of them went back to war, to fight, to do attacks. There were some unrehabilitated cadres tried to create some issues, but they were also contained. So the phase of humanitarian assistance was followed by a socio-economic development where the North and the East grew at 14% and beyond, and then a political engagement phase. And I want to say that in the future, the stability and security of Sri Lanka, it is paramount to maintain good inter-ethnic and inter-religious relations. Sri Lanka suffered in the past. The nations from outside interfered and intervened because of this challenge. We have to get this piece right. And I want to share with you that there's nothing more important than building that harmonious Sri Lanka, that one Sri Lanka. This is something we can do because this is something we have done in the past. Otherwise, Gokulan would not have come and performed on this stage. So I believe that we need to develop through our criminal justice and prison system and enter into our penal code. Insulting anyone's religion or race should be made a crime. We need a Harmony Act, an act where we treasure each other's cultural and linguistic and religious diversity. I know that many of you who are here have worked very hard to restore that balance, even after 30 years of war. And I believe, and I'm very confident, that as you develop the master plan for 2030, as you look at geopolitics, as you look at crafting that foreign policy and national security, the internal security, that you will take into consideration those issues that have challenged our nation. The riots of Digana could have been stopped after that three-wheel incident. The police intelligence service could have very clearly kept a very sharp eye. Could anything go wrong in Digana? Because there were groups waiting to strike. They were waiting for that man to die, to create chaos. So I want to share with you, if you look at the world, one of the greatest challenges the world is facing is from terrorism and extremism. Sri Lanka defeated terrorism, but Sri Lanka still has a challenge of defeating extremism. Terrorism is a vicious byproduct of exclusivism and extremism, and we all have to work towards that inclusion. Ladies and gentlemen, let me conclude my remarks by saying that this great nation has survived for 2,500 years, braved 21 invasions. And I have no doubt, as this region moves into a period where the Indo-Pacific region becomes a center for global power, for global economics, and also a region where we will see intense global competition, where we may even have 3 fleets, the American fleet, the Indian fleet, and the Chinese fleet in this region. We will still be able to prosper if we develop that astute vision of creating a foreign policy and a national security strategy that is future-oriented. I thank you very much.